So we've gone through the first two fundamental points, which is discernment, and then the idea that there's a unified field. The third fundamental point is that the underlying basis of existence, which is consciousness, but as it emerges on the finest level of existence, it has a structure. Consciousness, that one thing out of which all things is born, central knowledge point number 2, it has no edge, it has no handle. You can't take a chunk of consciousness and it's unbounded, you see. But consciousness, by its nature, is conscious. It's conscious of. So the question comes about before this universe was even in existence, when all there was this unbounded field of pure consciousness, what could it possibly have become conscious of? Itself. It became self-aware. Consciousness became conscious of itself. I like to say it's a little bit like when you're brushing your teeth in front of the mirror and you catch your own reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. For a minute, you think there are two people in the room. When there's not, there's only one. Consciousness does the same thing. Consciousness becomes conscious of itself, like does a double take, and perceives it as other. Duality born out of oneness. Now, consciousness, by its nature, is conscious. And so it becomes aware of those two things. Does another double take. Consciousness becomes conscious of the duality, and a third thing is born. Consciousness, by its nature, is conscious. It becomes aware of those three things. A fourth thing is born. Then a fifth thing, and then a sixth thing, and it cascades out into infinity with a very mathematically precise structure. 1 goes to 2, goes to 3, goes to 4. That structure in the Eastern tradition is called the Veda, the underlying structure of existence. In the West, that underlying structure is called the quantum mechanical realm. It's very interesting. Quantum mechanical. Quantum, what does quantum mean? It means it's quantized, it's units. It goes from 1 to 2 to 3. But it's lively. Consciousness just didn't think of it and then freeze. Consciousness is alive all the time. It's conscious, eternally conscious. So the whole thing is lively and interacting and dynamic. And so there's a mechanic to that dynamic as it sort of fluctuates and moves through these quantized units, these 1 to 2 to 3. So from the West, they view that, oh, it's quantum mechanics. The mechanics of the quantization of oneness. The mechanics of the quantization of consciousness. And that's a fundamental structure that underlies all of existence, that birthed all of existence. You see? It's dynamic and it's mathematically precise. And I'll tell you something really incredible. What does it mean to be human? We'll go a little bit more into the evolution of species, but for now, a human being is a species that has evolved to the point where its nervous system is capable of being cognizant of the full depth and breadth of its own true nature. In ancient times, there were people called rishis, seers. And what these seers did that's unlike most human beings, is that they purified the physiology. Most people, we have our distortions, our karmic bubbles, our samskaras, the limitations of our thought. But these rishis purified the physiology, purified the nervous system, purified the consciousness to the point where they could take their awareness in an undistorted manner all the way to the depth of their being and allow those fluctuations, those pulsations of the self-interacting dynamic of pure consciousness to well up through the physiology, from the subtle physiology of pure consciousness to the more and more until it emerged out even through the physical. Unadulterated, undistorted in its purity. And they allowed it to well up through and out their senses, out the vocal cords. And there's a name for that. The name for that, it's called Vedic cognition. And when these ancient rishis did that, thousands of years ago, people heard it and realized this is something really incredible. So they memorized it. They took what those ancient rishis were cognizing and they memorized word for word. And then they created pundits. They're called pundits, the people who memorize that. And they started at age 5, and their whole life is dedicated to chanting what these rishis cognized. You see? Think about that. The very fundamental structure of existence. The seed that birthed the entire tree of life. In other words, the source of all knowledge contained in seed form in the Veda. Cognized and available in the world today. I remember first time I was in India and I started talking, I was really surprised because a lot of the people, particularly the young people, not everybody, but surprisingly high percentage of the population, you ask them what the Veda is, and they're chants, and my grandfather used to chant them, and they're like myths and things like that. They have no comprehension of what Vedic cognition is and what a precious gem the knowledge of Veda offers us. You see? As you go deeper and deeper into existence, things become more and more powerful. On the surface, physical level, some level of power, a hammer and a nail, and you can do things. A little deeper, chemical level, chemistry, you can make bombs and blow things up. A little more power, radios, transmitters, things like that. And then as you go deeper and deeper, things become more and more sublime, more and more subtle, more and more delicate, more and more elusive, but more and more powerful. So what we have in Vedic knowledge is an incredibly powerful tool. There's a technology to it, you see. But because it's so delicate, it slips through humanity's fingers, generation after generation. And then to the people that becomes something far less than what it really is. And so what we want to do is get back to the essence of it, get back to a knowledge of it in its purity, so that we can employ those technologies without distortion and manifest really great things in the world. Because that self-interacting dynamic of pure consciousness, it's seamless. It's infinitely harmonious within its own self. There are no imperfections in it. Consciousness becomes conscious of itself, perceives others, duality is born, creates this whole giant, infinite crystalline structure that's infinitely harmonious and infinitely dynamic. Tap into that and allow that value to well up through all of life. Because you see, what happened was that as species evolved, the whole thing was so far beyond species' ability to comprehend that the knowledge slipped through the fingers. You see? So what has to happen is first we need an organism, a species capable of being cognizant of the full depth and breadth of life. That means a human being. And then we have to refine the distortions, the limitations of thought, the limitations of distortions of the emotions, so that spontaneously people live in harmony with natural law. Natural law means the nature of existence, the laws of nature, you see? Fundamental point number 3. The underlying basis of existence has a mathematically precise and dynamic nature. And we can tap into it. Good. You think about that. It's one thing to get that as a concept and put it on your shelf. It's another thing to work with it until you get to the point where it's like, yeah, I know that. That makes sense. That's truth. And that I have to leave up to you. Because as they say, the self is revealed to the self, by the self, and through the self. The guru is just a catalyst. The catalyst may be critical, may save you lifetimes, but the process is yours and yours alone. You see? You go for it.